Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, hi everybody. Pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Arni, and I'm a developer advocate at AWS, and I focus specifically on game tech within AWS. And I've been, super happy to be invited to speak to you today here. Glad you're here with me. And on the topic that is essential tech for games. And I'm here today to talk about why I think cloud is essential technology for games customers today and game studios. So about myself, I've been with AWS for 4 years now, and I've been working with games customers that whole time. First as a solutions architect, and then later on as a developer advocate, as I'm now. And before joining AWS, I led an infrastructure team for a very popular at the time game called Quiz Up. So I've been in the kind of games industry for about 8 years in total. And so the topic of today is why cloud for games. And so I'm going to talk about, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the AWS cloud and to AWS game tech and tell you what that is. And then I'm going to, talk a little bit about the needs of a game studio as I've seen it, and where I think cloud can be helpful. And I'll kind of support that and give you a few examples from how our customers are using the AWS cloud today. So for those of you who are joining us who are completely new to AWS, here's a kind of a very quick summary of who we are and what we do. So Amazon Web Services, or AWS, is a global provider of cloud services. And we help game studios provision kind of core building blocks of infrastructure. So that means compute, storage, databases, networking, and security services. We do that online through an on-demand, pay-as-you-go model. And we think that the cloud enables game studios to move much more quickly and much more dynamically in response to the player demand. So kind of how many people are playing the game by providing the elasticity to be able to scale up and scale down on demand and kind of as you need and when you need. And if you don't have to worry about provisioning IT resources, you can really focus on what differentiates your business, which in this world is creating great games and kind of innovating and cool gameplay. So the needs of a game studio, when you're making a game, there's a number of things that you have to consider. And, depending on where you are in the process, you're going to have to think about the hardware. So the hardware that you're working on, your workstations, you might need heavy graphics cards and kind of a heavy graphical workstation to work on. You're gonna have to think about like, how do you store source and assets? How do you, what do you do about source control? You're gonna have to think about how to build and setting up build infrastructure, build pipelines and those kinds of things. Of course, testing and QA, and so kind of CI/CD, combining the two. And then also on the output side of that, you're going to have to think about how you store different builds and artifacts and binaries and all the different versions that happen along the way. And this has to be done in a secure way, because the game source and the assets and the artifacts, all of these things are the key kind of intellectual property for a game studio. So you need to think about making sure that they're securely stored and that they can be securely accessed by anybody that's working on them. And all of these things start immediately, even as you're just starting development on a new game in a new studio. And then kind of part two of that is, when you've launched the game, you also need to think about how are your users using the game? Are they using the features that you've created? Are they using the features in the right way? Is the game balanced? And kind of from there, is the game fun? Although that kind of particular question is quite hard to answer. And typically you'd have some sort of analytics pipeline to collect the metrics and the usage and to be able to answer those types of questions. You have to think about reliability and uptime, because players are not gonna like playing a game if they are getting disconnected or if they can't get into the game to play it in the first place. You have to think about performance and global reach. And especially if you're playing a game where latency is important, then having a consistent low latency wherever the players are located in the world is going to be very important. And all of these things are going to lead to a good or a bad player experience. And that kind of leads us to the next step, which is that if the player experience isn't where you want it to be or expect it to be, you need to be able to iterate quickly and be able to kind of develop new features and get them out and deploy them very quickly. And maybe last but not least, you need to be able to do this at any scale. So ultimately, when you first launch your game, you want to be able to run this at a very small scale and with low costs, and few people are playing the game. You don't want to have a large infrastructure to run and pay for. But you also need to be able to ramp that up very quickly if your game gets more popular, and kind of as it gets more popular. So these are some of the challenges. There are definitely many more. And really that's where game tech comes in. So AWS game tech brings together solutions from all across Amazon. And so for every stage in your game's lifecycle, and regardless of kind of the studio size, and this includes, both specific services to games like Game Lift, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, our 3D game engine like Lumberyard, Twitch for engaging with fans and kind of engaging with your audience, and then all the way over to kind of what we call the core AWS services like virtual machines, storage, databases, and those kinds of things. So, if we think about game innovation, the way studios can compete today is really by being the quickest to the market, by keeping costs low, and by innovating on gameplay. And because of the pay-as-you-go pricing of AWS, your studio doesn't have to estimate how much compute resources to provision or pay up front for computing infrastructure. With AWS and with cloud services, you only pay for the resources that you use, and ultimately you only pay for the resources that you need. And it's kind of our mission to help you achieve that. And with the on-demand infrastructure, this allows you to spin up computing resources where and when you need them with just a few clicks of a mouse, or kind of, as I prefer, a few API calls and infrastructure code and those types of things. But being able to do that really kind of increases the agility of your game development and operations, because you can experiment more. And experimentation is important. And being able to experiment with, being able to fail fast and experiment while taking low risk, that allows you to kind of iterate more quickly, and it allows you to increase the likelihood of finding the right direction for your game to be able to succeed. And so kind of if we summarize that, ultimately all of this means you can focus on your core business value, which is to create great games, and allowing AWS to oversee the task of providing IT infrastructure. Then you can invest more of your own time, which is typically very limited, into really thinking about how to grow the success of the game. So let me see here. Yeah. So I mentioned many of the requirements that you have to think about when you're developing a game. And whether you're looking at analytics or data pipelines or content distribution or the core backend services, even how you monetize, like all of these things, or at the heart of all of these things, is going to be your infrastructure. So the choices that you make in kind of how you build and host and deploy that is a very critical component of your success. So here's a selection of games customers that rely on the AWS infrastructure. And our customers are global, they're all around the world, and they span anything from enormous AAA studios, Ubisoft and Riot Games, to smaller studios with maybe just a handful of developers. So all sizes. So let me give you a few examples of where I think cloud can be very useful for you and be essential technology. So we can start with backend services. When it comes to compute, we often talk about raw compute power, and game servers are typically the first solution that you think about in that context. But AWS Game Tech, since it's kind of this combination of both game-specific services and also the core services from AWS, it really gives you a choice and flexibility to choose a route that suits your needs. If you know AWS really well, if you have AWS competency in the company, then you can create customized server infrastructure in the cloud. You can maintain full control and kind of design the infrastructure as you would like to run it, using typical kind of EC2 instances, storage in S3, databases in RDS. And I'm mentioning now a number of different things that you may or may not know. If you prefer to have a managed service, then something like Game Lift, for example, allows you to ship games much faster and quickly bring players the game experience that they expect. And you can do it with less operational resources. So you have a lot of choice in that. So let me tell you about the managed version, which is Game Lift. With Game Lift, you can deploy and operate and scale dedicated game servers for multiplayer games as a managed service. And it leverages the power and reliability of AWS because it's built on top of AWS technology. Now, Game Lift works with various kinds of games, but it's designed for these session-based multiplayer games. And so how does that work? How does it help you achieve some of the things that we discussed in the beginning? Essentially, with Game Lift, you upload a build of your server. So you're creating a game, let's say in Unity or in Unreal, and you create a server executable or server binary, and you upload that into AWS. You integrate that server code with Game Lift using a simple SDK, which kind of signals things like the server is ready to go, it's ready to take on players, it's healthy, and so on. And you create a configuration about, that tells the system which operating system do you need to run on, and what's the command line to start the server, and so on, and kind of what size and type of server do you need. From there, GameLift will create all of the necessary infrastructure for you to run those servers around the world. So it'll create a server image for you to start new servers from. It'll create all of the networking, the subnets, the routing, the internet connectivity, and all of those things that are necessary for those servers. It'll also create auto-scaling policies that are going to scale your fleet of servers up and down based on the demand from your players. So if there's a lot of players playing, it's going to add more servers. If there's fewer people playing, it's going to remove servers. So that also happens automatically and with just a click of a button. And GameLift is supported in 15 different regions around the world. So using that kind of same configuration that you create, you can clone stamp that into 15 different regions around the world and deploy your game servers immediately, kind of very close to your users, and support the low latency requirements that some games have. GameLift is flexible. It also has a free matchmaking feature, so you can matchmake people into sessions, so based on either skill level or classes and things like that. And it also helps you find the lowest latency server for that group of player to play on when they have been matched. GameLift also provides you with high availability, because if there's an outage somewhere, then the best player for you to play on is just going to be the next best player. So you're automatically going to be routed to a different region or a different server if something isn't responding correctly. And so by scaling to match the demand, by running the game servers close to your users, by having built-in failovers, you're already ticking a lot of the operational boxes in the reliability, global reach, performance, and so on, which are really important to you. And as an example, Montreal-based developer Behavior Interactive, they moved their game Dead by Daylight, as it was kind of growing more and more and more. They moved it to using dedicated servers on Amazon GameLift, and they were able to improve the ping time of the game, making the game much faster and making the latency much more equal for players, because prior to that, they were using listen servers or using kind of peer-to-peer networking. Behavior also used a feature of GameLift, which I haven't mentioned before, which is called Fleet IQ, which is a way for you to utilize even lower cost instances by intelligently using spot instances in AWS. And these are instances that are interruptible, but Fleet IQ manages to use them when they are available and when they are safe with really great savings. Now, if we think about scale, Fortnite is always a great example of how a developer can use AWS to really scale to unprecedented levels. And this is a game that enjoys 250 million monthly average users, and that number is probably a little bit old that I have here. So to balance that game and to identify anomalies and cheaters and to squash bugs and improve their performance, Fortnite is supported by a massive data warehouse. And at our user conference, reInvent in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, they shared that they were already maintaining back then a 35 petabyte data warehouse on top of AWS. And they were adding 5 additional petabytes every month to that data warehouse. And this is using services that anybody can deploy, right? Anybody on this call, whatever size you are, this is using the same services and the same infrastructure as you all have access to. And so that's why it's always interesting to look at these kind of large examples versus the smaller ones. If we think about databases, AWS has over 15 different kind of purpose-built databases for graphs, relational databases, NoSQL databases, caching databases, and so on. And our games customers are using a lot of these different types of databases. Now, for example, Supercell, which has a very interesting culture. It runs in very small autonomous teams, and they do that to reduce the need for hierarchy and processes. And for the game's Clash of Clans, which has over 2 billion installs in over 7 years of running, they have a small team that has only 2 server engineers, and these server engineers are both tasked with maintaining the infrastructure, but also creating features for the game. And this team of 2 server engineers migrated 300 databases into AWS Aurora, which is a fully managed relational database. And they did that with a small team. And so you don't need this kind of massive amount of people when you're using these managed services that help you run and scale. So being conscious of time here, I'm going to give you one more interesting example here, which is from machine learning. So we have a large stack of different machine learning services available in AWS, anywhere from the kind of GPU instances and very fast server hardware that you can use to do machine learning. But we also have a set of high-level services that allow you to do machine learning work without having the machine learning expertise. And IO Interactive has a great example here where they used our service Amazon Polly to give non-playable characters in Hitman 2 voices while they were in development. So by using Polly, they were able to write the storyline, write text for who's going to say what, and then they're gonna then they use Polly to generate voices for those characters from the text, so they could kind of iterate on the story while they were developing it, and saving cost and ensuring that they would only get in the voice actors to actually record and kind of act the players when the story was done and when it's kind of ready to ship. So I find that an incredibly cool example of using these machine learning services to achieve something pretty simple, but really moving the development of the story much more similarly to how we develop software. So I'm out of time. I want to kind of give you, if you want to. Okay, I don't have a link here anyway. So we have a game tech learning path on AWS where you can, get in. You can learn about the game tech services, how to use them, where they're useful, and so on. So if you search for AWS game tech learning path, you'll find the page which has these different sets of paths to follow. Oh yeah, there's my URL. All right, and yeah, I'll skip over this one. We have a few ideas about how to get started and how to try different things out. But if you want to discuss, meet me at the bar. I'm going to be hanging out in gather.town by the Game Tech bar area, along with a few of my colleagues from business development and sales. All right, thanks a lot.